Thank you for joining us today. For those who may not know you, can you do a little introduction of who you are and what you do?
Well, I am Benjamin Chee. I founded 3 watch brands over the last 11 years. So I started in around 2012 with my first brand, Celadon. So in 2018, I started my second watch brand, Milléchron. And finally in 2019, my flagship brand, BCHH, Benjamin Chee Haute Horlogerie.
I think rewinding a little bit, I know you studied law, right? So how did you go from, reading law to, going into the watch business?
I always had, a passion for design and history, and I realized that living in London, surrounded by so many, amazing museums, some of the best in the world, amazing art galleries, and even though I had a sterling career lined up in the law with one of the best firms in Singapore and a few others in the UK, I realized that I didn't really have a passion for it. And I'm a firm believer that passion is an essential ingredient if you really want to be good at what you do.
Your brands are very focused on, Chinese culture, Chinese watchmaking. How did you get, interested, or what made you want to discover more about Chinese culture and history?
Ironically started when I lived in London, and I was about 10 minutes walk away from the British Museum with lots of amazing Chinese artifacts and national treasures. So I was exposed to that, and I realized that there was this huge part of my heritage that I didn't yet discover, and that was further developed when I moved to Shanghai in 2008, and I lived there for about half a year. There was, this amazing schools of craftsmanship that I had not been exposed to earlier.
What was the catalyst, that made you want to start a proudly made in China watch brand?
There were many of these craftsmen hidden in, the rural parts of China, not just in Shanghai, but in the various surrounding provinces. When I lived in China, I traveled quite extensively around the country, and I discovered that there were so many craftsmen that were laboring silently without any acknowledgement. I felt that it was my duty to promote this, to develop it, to improve it perhaps.
Were there or are there specific elements of Chinese horology or craftsmanship that you feel for the most, that these are the elements that you really want to preserve?
In the 60s and 70s, there were very strong defining traits of what a Chinese watch would be. The beautiful Chinese character logos, the very adorably designed logos actually, and the guilloche, which was quite unique to China, that was not really used in other countries. The general elegant aesthetic, so center seconds, a very thin case. When I was in Beijing, going to the Forbidden City, seeing so many beautiful enamel clocks that were, first they were commissioned by wealthy Chinese in Europe. And then later this was brought back into China, and these were created indigenously in various provinces of China, in Guangdong, in Shanghai, in Zhejiang. So I realized that there was this ancestral craft that still remain, and especially for cloisonné enamel, which has about 600 years of indigenous development in China, which was separate from the European tradition of cloisonné enamel. And this was perpetuated by Master Xiong Song Tao, who is now a dear friend of mine. His grandfather used to be the imperial enameler of the Forbidden City.
When you think about luxury watchmaking, people immediately think Swiss, and that's seen as many people as the pinnacle of watchmaking. So coming into the business and doing Chinese watches, did you face any resistance or any doubts? What was that like?
Oh, absolutely. There was tremendous resistance initially, and still to this day. But I was very much prepared for that. I expected that. And a lot of it was based on ignorance, a lack of education. Some of it is justifiable because, There didn't exist that level of knowledge, even in China, let alone outside, outside the country. Surprisingly, there was also a very strong supporter base that really loved what I was doing and really supported what I was doing.
And you mentioned that you currently have 3 brands. So maybe can you tell us how different and distinct these 3 brands are, and what is the statement you're looking to make with each of them?
So starting with Celadon, the ethos of Celadon is very simple. It's just proudly Chinese. So the very best Chinese craftsmanship and completely indigenous design. So China has this bad reputation for copying people, copying other countries. I wanted to stamp that out. I wanted to fight against that. Original design was a core tenet of the brand DNA of Celadon. So my intention was to showcase Chinese craftsmanship at 2 different price points, both the high and the affordable. And my second brand, Milléchron, that's a bit more simple perhaps. That's just vintage-inspired Swiss designs, European designs, harkening back to the golden age of watchmaking in the 50s and 60s with very pure, elegant design, recreated for the modern age, but with better quality movements, cases, components, etc. I love vintage watches. I collect so many of them. But they're not very practical for everyday use, especially in a tropical country like Singapore. So I created this brand basically to sort of remix these old designs, which I really loved, but it's sort of remixing fantasy vintage designs and then recreating them in a higher quality with better movements than the vintage ones for the modern era. So my proudest work so far would probably be my flagship brand, BCHH, which I started in 2019, and that, in contrast to Milléchron, which is more vintage focused, BCHH is very much futuristic, and we want to push the envelope in terms of design, in terms of innovation, in terms of what is possible technically.
Speaking of the GPHG, which widely regarded as the Oscars of watchmaking, how did it feel to be nominated?
It felt amazing, to be honest. I mean, as an outsider to the watch industry, I had never even heard of the GPHG until I think around 2018, and I didn't even realize that you had to submit your own watch. I thought other people submitted your watches for you, so I had no idea how any of that worked, to be honest. So it was only in 2020 that I submitted my watch for the first time, and I had huge hopes for it. It didn't go through, it didn't get nominated. So 2020, I didn't get nominated. 2021, I submitted again, did not get nominated. Finally, on my 3rd try, 2022, I finally got nominated. And that was about 4 weeks after my birthday, so I was completely, over the moon, and it was the best birthday present. And also, to represent Singapore as well as the first Singapore brand to receive a GPHG nomination ever. I think we are also only the 2nd brand in Southeast Asia to receive a GPHG nomination. So that's just an amazing feeling.
When you first went into the watch business, were things like awards and all the, recognition in general, was it something that you had always aimed for?
I never purposefully went into the watch industry. I was all along an outsider, apart from loving watches, admiring them, collecting them perhaps. My desire from the beginning was simply to create a watch that I truly, really loved. The accolades really were just truly an icing of the cake.
Talking about the watch that was nominated this year, the Celestial Voyager Arctic Sunrise.
That's right.
So it was a collaboration with Anderson Genève. So how do you select who you collaborate with?
I always loved the vintage world timers of the 30s, of the 50s, 60s, created by Louis Courtier for various brands, especially the vintage Patek Philippe. And I wanted to create my own, shall we say, because there were things that I wanted to tweak about those beautiful watches. So my decision to go with Sven Anderson was simple. He was the go-to guy for world timers in the independent space. So he had created 5 or 6 world timers before that in 40 years of independent watchmaking.
My next question is about one of your latest watches, the Singapore edition of the Celestial Voyager. Can you tell me a bit about that watch, the inspiration?
You know, being from Singapore, obviously I wanted to put Singapore on the map, literally, this time on an 18mm diameter enamel dial. I realized that no other brand had created a world timer with Singapore on the map. I mean, obviously there were Singapore editions, but not with the map of Singapore represented in enamel. We had many ideas, so we went from having historic photos, black and white bungalows, even 19th century paintings of the coast. We thought of having that represented, but eventually what won out was just a simple map, really. But it's deceptively simple because there's lots of details in it, and let's keep in mind that this is a 18mm dial. It's a solid gold dial. It's got a surface area of about 2.5 square centimeters. So in that, we have to cram roughly 1 meter of solid gold wire in it, just to give you an idea of the complexity and the absolute crazy craftsmanship that goes into it.
I believe it's also not like a limited edition piece. It's something you plan to keep doing and keep customizing.
We didn't want to make it a limited edition because it would probably sell out in no time at all. So it's obviously created in very few pieces each year. We probably create like less than 5 a year. I mean, the entire Celestial Voyager production across all variants, across pink, gold, platinum, we create roughly about 15 to 20 a year, to give you an idea. So it's minuscule, truly. You will unlikely bump into someone else by accident wearing another Celestial Voyager.
I know you brought some Celadon pieces. Maybe we can talk about 1 or 2 of your favorite ones or highlight pieces.
So the first collection of the Celadon Century, which was in 2021. Exactly. So there were 3 of them, and that's Starry Night. This is Peacock and Peonies, and then the regulator. So I wanted to offer a range of dials. I didn't want us to be pigeonholed as just creating Chinese design dials. So this is probably more Chinese, but the Starry Night is obviously more Western, more European. I wanted to show that we could create amazing Cloisonné dials both in the Western and the Eastern traditions. And also, not to leave out the technical part, we also have the regulator, which shows that we've got the technical chops, as it were. And these have the CH1 movement, which was our first movement. It's got all the trappings of high horology. You've got the Breguet overcoil, the hand finishing, beveling. Everything is finished by hand. We've got the gold chatons.
What is this engraving in Chinese at the back?
So that's of course customizable. We've had clients put special dates or initials on it, but this particular engraving is something I came up with, which basically means to transmit Chinese culture and to achieve a great mission.
Okay. And are these all limited pieces as well?
These are not limited, but limited in production.
Limited in production.
Yeah. So if you can see, they all have handmade hands, and the hands are also finished differently. So these are what we call transition blued hands, which I think we are the only brand in the world to offer them, where you can really see the artisanal quality of the bluing because of the gradient effect.
And in terms of the enameling, what would you say is, I guess, what makes Chinese enameling different from Western?
The Xiong enamel, the cloisonné wire he uses is about 0.04 millimeters in thickness, whereas in Switzerland they use about 0.07 millimeters. So the fact that it's almost twice as thin means that the wire, we can put more wire into the image and create a much more intricate image. So as you can see, with Starry Night, it's just ridiculous how it's done. And if you see the production photos, the production process photos, where each gold wire is individually tweaked and laid by hand on an image and then fired 20 times in an enamel oven, it's just crazy how it's done by hand. I mean, I could never do that myself. I'd probably go blind perhaps. But it's just testament to the skill and patience and craftsmanship, that the enamelers have.
I saw that, a portion of your proceeds from your watch business also goes towards animal shelter. Why did you decide to do that?
First of all, the animal shelter is actually called Gentle Paws, so that's a dog shelter. They were a very small shelter, and they're not even a registered charity because it costs quite a lot of money to be a charity, actually. A lot of people said that I should support a larger shelter that could help me in terms of business more, but that sort of defeated the purpose of helping them. I really wanted to truly help them, and it wasn't just like a marketing thing or a business decision. It was just, I just want to help these guys, and they really need it. So, I wanted to imbue my passion with even greater meaning and purpose. I had just recently gotten a dog at that stage, and that was pretty much my first true pet. And so, I had just tremendous burning love for dogs at that point, which has only grown further in the last few years. My dog at that time was named Chestnut. He was a little corgi, well, not so little, quite fat really. When I was building my brands, he would just be this nighttime a companion really, and he would just sit at my feet, and as I was designing stuff and replying to emails, he would just be there. And I realized that every dog should have that home, that family, that forever family. So that was a huge part of my mission. After Chestnut passed away last year, which was 2 weeks before I got the email, announcing my GPHG nomination. So that was a bit of a emotional roller coaster, but it was just a sign that I really had to step up my efforts even more. And so now I have a new corgi who's taken up the mantle of warming my feet at night, and I had this calling again to support another dog shelter called Hope Dog Rescue. So both of these are based in Singapore. And so now, it's my objective, my mission really, to support both of these shelters as best I can.
You mentioned also it's been about 11 years since you started going into watches or in the watch business. What has been, I guess, your greatest achievements or your most memorable moments in your career so far?
Well, greatest achievements off the top of my head would be, creating all these amazing watches, especially in the last 2-3 years, I would say. I've realized that we've worked with 3 AHCI watchmakers, with about 5 more in store, which I can't review publicly just yet. We have gained 2 GPHG nominations, the first and only Singapore brand to gain these. We are the only high horology brand in Southeast Asia and Singapore to this date, as far as I know. We've created about 5 new movements in the last 3 years of existence, which is pretty amazing, pretty expensive as well, but worth it, I hope. And we've created a high horology Chinese brand, which, as far as I know, is also a first in the world.
So maybe you can tell me about this new watch that you brought as well?
So this was the first collection of the Celadon Century, and this is the second collection. So there are 4 in this collection. That's the Mandarin Duck. This is the Duel of Swallows. This is the Temple of Heaven. So I wanted to show that we could wear it as in a sporty way as well, with a rubber strap, and it still goes quite fittingly. And finally, this is the flagship of the collection, the Seven Wonders, which is just crazy. It's our most complicated cloisonné dial so far. So these have the CH1, CH5 movement in two different finishes. So if you see there, we've got the Seven Wonders represented, the seven modern wonders.
Yeah.
And on a surface area of roughly 2.5 square, well, less than 2 square centimeters, each wonder is created. So each wonder has less than 2 square centimeters of space for us to just put all that cloisonné wire dial, wire on. And it's just crazy. The enameler, after he was done with it, was saying this is just outrageous.
Yeah,
like, we can't do this, you know. Yeah. So these two are perhaps more oriental in design. This one is, I would say, more, you know, like a world art thing.
Yeah.
And then we've got the two different CH5 movements here, which is our flagship movement. We've got the rose gold here, we've got the white gold there, and then this shows the Grand Sonnery style clicks, the chatons, which are just amazing, you know, the traditional 5-finger bridge layout. So the little clicks here are meant to make the timekeeping more even and the winding more fluid. So there's a purpose to the design as well. It's not just aesthetics.
Typically, in terms of inspiration, what comes to you first? Is it the movement or the design?
It's a bit complicated. It really depends, because the movement is the most difficult and time-consuming to create. And we are also limited by technical aspects. So I can't like literally design a movement in any shape I want. But in this particular case, the CH5 is inspired by the Chinese phoenix, actually. So you can see the three balanced cocks here. They are sort of inspired by the three tail feathers. And you've got the phoenix head here as well with the crest. So, you know, within technical limitations, I try to design it according to a theme.
Now that you say it,
Yeah.
I can see it.
Yeah, and so the design is sort of shaped around that movement, because the movement takes, you know, years and a tremendous amount of money and expertise to create. So that's the cornerstone of the watch design. And then we've got the case, obviously, and then the dial, and finally the hands, I guess.